If you like the little stats column that I do in every monthly wrap up, well, this is like that, but much, much more in depth. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today we are going through all of my reading stats for 2024. I absolutely love making this video because it really makes me sit down and say what it is that I have done over the last 12 months, the things that I wanted to concentrate on, and I said that I would do that at the beginning of the year. Have I actually managed to do them, or did they just completely fall to the wayside? Across 2024, I had a pretty okay reading year. I felt like the number that I was reading has definitely fallen down, and I don't know if that is because I was busier. I don't know if that's because I was doing other things, so I wasn't reaching for books as much as I usually would have, but I definitely did still get some reading in. All of the stats that you are about to see here have come from a couple of different places. I use Cawpile, which was created by G from Book Roast, to keep track of every single book that I have read throughout the year, but I don't track my DNFs there. That number is going to come from Storygraph, and there's a couple of other graphs that are going to be interspersed here and there that come from my Storygraph wrap up, but the vast majority of them are going to come from a Cawpile that I have kind of tweaked to make work for what I want it to do. On to the big numbers. I read 114 books across 2024 and I decided to DNF a further 22 of them. There are a couple of reasons as to why I will DNF a book, and some of them will become a not for now, which is in a completely different place, and it just means that it's not the kind of book that I want to reach for at the moment. But I know that if I come back to it in a couple of months, in a couple of years, I'm going to be in a much better place and I'm going to really enjoy it. And I know that this is something that a lot of other people have noticed, that if you pick up the book at the wrong time, it's not going to do anything for you. But if you come back to it in a completely different light, it's really going to work out for you. The first book that I finished in 2024 was Will They or Won't They by Ava Wilder, and the last book that I finished in 2024 was The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter. In 2024, I read almost 15,000 pages, 14,931 to be exact. Obviously, June with the Amazing Readathon was the most voracious reading month with just over 2,500 pages read. But in September, it took a little bit of a seat back and I read 542 pages. For audiobooks, I listened to the equivalent of 583 hours of reading. Obviously, June was the most with about 95 hours in there. And this time, July was the least frequent with just 24 hours. The average length of those books was about 319 pages. And I would stay with about 5 days with every book that I read, except for Heartstopper Volume 5, which I read in 1 day, or Over the Influence by Joanna Levesque, which I read in 32 days. The longest book that I read in 2024 was Marion Keyes' My Favorite Mistake, which clocked in at a whopping 599 pages, and the shortest was Overshare by Charlotte L. Frears, which had 32 pages. This is one that I changed up to make Cawpile work for me, and it kind of came from the Amazing Readathon back in 2023, when all of the teams had to read books that had a majority colour on the cover. So I decided this is something that I wanted to keep a track of again, and I wanted to see what colours were coming up a lot more in the books that I was reading. So I asked my friend Brianna from Four Paws in a Book, who is an Excel god and knows exactly how to make everything do what you want it to do. I asked her if she wouldn't mind just tweaking a couple of columns for me and making a pie graph that would show me what colours were more prevalent and what colours were less prevalent in the books that I was reading. In a no surprise to anyone, the most common colour that I had been reading was blue, with 32 books that I had read across the year having a predominantly blue cover. And the least common was kind of multicolored covers that had just about 2 or 3 books in there. Having said that I wanted to read a book cover to cover in German that I had never read before in English, this one did not go as well as I wanted it to. In 2024, every single book, 100% of them, was read in English. This is definitely something that I would like to expand on a little bit more, and hopefully it's one that's going to change in 2025. Speaking of languages, I read 8 books that were in translation this year. 6 of them had originally been published in Japanese, and those were manga books, and the other 2 were Fredrik Backman books that had originally been published in Swedish. In terms of the ways that I read these books, the majority of them were audiobooks. About 55% of the books that I read this year were audiobooks, and then it was very tight between physical books and ebooks. 31 of the books that I read in 2024 were physical books, and the other 30 were ebooks. While I do enjoy a reread, it definitely wasn't the main way that I was reading books. About 18 of the books that I read in 2024 were rereads, while the other 96 were books that I was experiencing for the first time. The graph for series or standalone is one that I'm always interested in because I like to say that I'm firmly in the middle. I don't prefer reading series, I don't prefer reading standalones. I enjoy both of them pretty equally for what they are. So, seeing that there was an almost equal split between standalones and series kind of puts weight on that argument. 47 of the books that I had read in 2024 were part of a series, and the other 67 of those were standalones, which is relatively close to half and half. I started off 20 brand new series this year. I read 18 sequels and I finished off 8 series. And I didn't decide to DNF a single series in 2024. As for book clubs and readathons, I read 3 books as part of a book club, and that was the English book club here in Berlin, which I think is on hiatus at the moment because I haven't heard anything about what's going to be happening in 2025. But I read 31 books across 2024 that were all for readathons. Naturally, the Amazing Readathon ate up a huge portion of that, and 20 of the books that I had read were part of the Amazing Readathon. The other 11 were bunched in with Fabelin, with the Battle of the Girl Bands Readathon, with Pick Pongathon, with Holiday Rom-Comathon, and there were so many great readathons that I took part in 2024, and I am so excited to see what 2025 is going to do for me. If you've seen my recent video where I told you that I spent the entire year reading a bunch of different genres and figuring out what it was that I enjoyed, then my genre breakdown pie chart won't be a huge surprise to you, but there were a couple of things that surprised me. Naturally, romance and contemporary fiction kind of battled each other out for first place throughout most of the year. Romance came into first place with 42 books, and contemporary took the second place slot with 31 books. Something that did surprise me is that there are 5 fantasy books on this list, and something that is surprising me in a not quite so pleasant way is that there are only 4 non-fiction books on here. I felt like I had been reading quite a lot of non-fiction across 2024, and the non-fiction that I read, I did really enjoy it. But it's definitely something that I need to up my game in for 2025. Having looked at it myself, the numbers for book length doesn't feel correct, and I think that that is because when I'm reading an audiobook, I don't put the page numbers in. But it would be correct to say that the data is correct, and the most common book length that I read is between 350 to 400 pages. The vast majority of the books that I read in 2024, over 75% of them, were novels, with a couple of mangas, a couple of graphic novels, and a couple of non-fiction books also thrown in there for good measure. For the publishers that I was reading from in 2024, there is a clear winner. There were a couple of new publishers that I had experienced for the first time. There were a couple of self-published books that I had read in 2024, but the vast majority of them were published by Penguin or one of the Penguin imprints. In terms of where I got the books that I was reading, it's a relatively even split, more so than I think I was expecting it to be. The most books that I had gotten this year were from the library, be that physically or be that from Libby. But I also read quite a lot of the books that I own on my physical or on my Kindle TBR, which I don't think I had expected to have been doing. A lot of the other books that I read this year came from Everand, Nayscript, and also came from NetGalley. I didn't read quite as many NetGalley books as I wanted to in 2024, but I definitely didn't abandon it as much as I think I did. The star and half-star ratings kind of gave me a result I didn't expect. I have always thought that my most common rating is a straight up 4-star. And in fact, for the rating blanket that I'm going to make in 2025, I've bought much more of the 4-star books than I have for any other color. But my most prevalent rating in 2024 was actually a 3.5-star. 31 of the books that I read in 2024 got a 3.5-star rating. And that was kind of my average for the entire year. My average rating was just under 7 when you go through Copal, about 6.91, which did equate into a 3.5-star rating. But I had quite a lot of 4-star reads, I had quite a lot of 4.5-star reads, but I didn't have as many 5-star reads as I think I would have hoped to. I don't know if that is because I have become a little bit more stringent as to what gets a 5-star, but there just weren't so many of them in 2024. The age rating doesn't really surprise me in that over 80% of the books that I read were intended for an adult audience, but I am a little bit surprised that I read so many young adult fiction books. I read 12 books across 2024 that were geared for a young adult audience, and as somebody who says that they have gone quite away from young adult fiction and young adult reading, That's a little bit surprising to me. 68% of the books that I read in 2024 had been published within the last 3 years. Most of them, 35, had actually been published within 2024 itself. 23 books were published in 2023, and then 10 were published in 2022, which means that I am much more current and much more recent in my reading than I think I was expecting myself to be. And the oldest published book that I read this year was A Christmas Carol, which was published in 1843. Then it's on to the demographic stuff, and that's something that I definitely try and expand on every single year. I don't necessarily know if that's gone so well in 2024. Only 40 of the books that I read in 2024 featured an LGBT character of any persuasion. The vast majority of those I had umbrellaed as queer. This is the term that I use if there's no specific mention of what their sexuality is in this book, but they are on the queer spectrum somewhere. As for authors of colour, it's even worse. Only 18 of the books that I read in 2024 were by an author of colour. Of those, 12 authors came from an Asian background or were Asian themselves. 5 of them were Black authors, and only 1 author was Latinx. I would really love to read more Latinx stories across 2025, so I am open to as many suggestions as you can give me. About 75% of the books that I read in 2024 were written by somebody who identifies as female, 19 were then written by male authors, and the others were written by non-binary authors, and there were also 9 books that I read by multiple authors. In terms of nationality, American, British, and Irish authors took the respective podium places, but I was really glad to see Canadian authors had been turning up on my sheet this year. I haven't read a whole lot of books by Canadian authors, but it's definitely something that I want to experience more, and I'd really love to expand on the 5 books that I read in 2024. In terms of the most read authors, 2 authors have gotten the podium place with 5 books. Christina Lauren and Ayuko Hata, who had written quite a lot of the manga that I had been reading throughout Amazing Readathon. With 3 books read from all of these were Anne M. Martin, B.K. Borison, and Sarah Breen and Emer McLysett. I then read 2 books by Talia Hibbert and Friedrich Bachmann, and every other author I had just visited 1 book from. I also discovered the works of 52 new authors across 2024, which is a really great number when you think about it, because I read 91 different authors across the year. So just over half of what I read in 2024 was by an author that I'd never experienced before. There is the deep dive into how my 2024 reading went. Do we have any kind of stats in common, or is there anything that you think I definitely need to put a little bit more work into for 2025? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a chart emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.